All right. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
This is Katerina, our special guest, teaching us about some social diversity issues with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So, I'm going to interview you, and maybe you can help us understand a little bit more about these issues. So, first question. What are some common stereotypes about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder?
I'd say there's two main ones. The first one is a lot of people think that you can see it and that there's an FASD face. There are certain facial features that can occur for someone with FASD. However, it's quite rare that someone would have the full facial features because it's only a 5-day span if the mother was drinking alcohol in a specific time of her pregnancy that the full facial features will occur. So it's actually only 5% of individuals with FASD have the facial features.
Oh,
So
okay.
you can't always see it.
Can't always judge a book by its cover.
Right, yeah. So really you're looking more at the cognitive areas, you're looking at the behavioral aspects of it because the central nervous system is growing throughout the pregnancy, and so that's why always there's impairments in the cognitive areas. The second area I would say is that it is a spectrum. In the name, it's a spectrum. So we really can't paint every person with the same brush because everyone's going to be a little bit different, and that's based on many different factors on how much alcohol is consumed, the maternal factors, things like that. So really when we're looking at it, there are common characteristics of individuals with FASD, but everyone is different, and that's why there's a spectrum. And so we have to realize that some people will need a lot of support in their lives, and some people need just a few supports in their lives.
Okay, so it depends on circumstances within the pregnancy, and it also depends on the person.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so second question for you. What are the biggest social justice issues you have come across in this population?
I would say that within the justice system that there's a huge overrepresentation of people with FASD in our criminal justice system. So a few stats, the Public Health Agency of Canada say that 60% of individuals with FASD have some sort of involvement in the justice system.
Sorry, you said 60%?
60%, yeah, which is a huge percentage. The John Howard Society of Ontario says that FASD is 10 times higher in our prison populations than that of the general population. And there was actually a recent study done in Alberta, and it was done over 6 years looking at youth, so ages 12 to 25, and they found that 31% of individuals with FASD have been involved in the criminal justice system compared to 7% of the general population of that youth in Alberta. So that's a huge difference, especially when you look at the amount of the general population compared to people with FASD. So that's a huge problem, I think, is that there's just a ton of people in our justice system that have FASD. So that's something to look at. And when we look at the justice system, it really is there to deter people from doing that behavior and to rehabilitate. But as we know with FASD, it's permanent brain damage, and so them going to jail isn't going to change that permanent brain damage. So they're going to come out the same person. Oftentimes they're victimized in the jail setting, and it's just not a good thing. So it's not actually deterring them from doing crimes, and it's not rehabilitating them at all. So we have to look at that as well. There was a private member's bill in Parliament in 2014 and 2016 where they wanted to have FASD as a mitigating factor in the justice system, but that was shot down by Parliament. However, Parliament did say that the justice system should be trained and educated in FASD, such as RCMP, correctional officers, and that there needs to be screening tools when they get into jail so that strategies can be put in place.
So would you say that it's important for counselors and psychologists to be able to be familiar with and comfortable with knowing how to assess or recognize the signs and working with this population?
For sure, and just because with the stats and the overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, I think it is important because if you're going to work in the justice system, you're for sure going to see people with FASD. So it's important to understand what to look for as well as how to help them because, like I said, just being in jail is not going to help them. So if we can help them in their situations, then that's going to be really important. The other thing, too, is the cost of assessment. So it costs over $6,000 to get an FASD assessment, and that's not covered by Alberta Healthcare. So that's a huge Huge social justice issue because a lot of these people are not getting diagnosed or misdiagnosed in childhood, and it's a big problem. And so we really have to look at the reasons why. It is a team of individuals doing the assessments, so that's why it's so expensive. In our justice system, adult court does not pay for assessments. However, in a recent high-profile case, Legal Aid did pay for the FASD assessments, but that's very rare. That's probably not going to happen again, or very rarely. Youth court is actually way ahead of adult court, and they're doing really good things with individuals with FASD, and they do pay for assessments. So that's a positive thing and a step in the right direction. So now it's just if we're working with adults, it's going to be a lot harder in those areas. And then looking at the justice process. So court proceedings can be really hard for an individual with FASD. They don't understand them. They'll often plead guilty. They don't understand what's being said or asked of them, and so that's a huge problem as well. And they're getting huge sentences because they just don't know what's going on within the court. So that's a big one.
Okay, and then what would you say are misunderstandings in the nature of somebody with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder who has also committed a crime?
A lot of times working with the clients that I've worked with is they are often victimized. They're hanging out with the wrong people. There's a lot of peer pressure. Oftentimes they're the scapegoat for other offenders, and so they're the ones that are getting charged and going to jail. And like I said before, they don't understand the court proceedings, and so they will just say guilty, and then they're being charged for something sometimes that they didn't even do, or were very part of it minimally, but because they don't understand, they're getting charged for these things. So that's a huge thing. And oftentimes, too, when they were younger, they're getting in trouble at school. People don't know that they have FASD, so they're being seen as defiant, and they're getting kicked out. They're having a hard time growing up. And even in the foster care system, how many times I've heard my clients say that they were in like 20 foster homes as children, so they're just getting kicked out of home after home after home. So then you add all that trauma and all those other factors on top of it, then they get into adulthood and they're still seen as defiant, and all of these things are happening. They don't have any support, and you can see why they get involved in the justice system.
Okay, and that leads good into my next question. What should someone look for when they are taking into consideration fetal alcohol spectrum disorder?
So if they're not assessed, there's some screening tools out there. So there's the Life History Screen, which was developed by Grant and her colleagues, which is kind of like just a questionnaire that you go through. Also, the Sante Center in BC, they made a screening tool for probation officers. Again, it's a little bit longer of a form, but you can look at these online. So they're not, it's not to assess the person for FASD, it's just a screening tool to say these are red flags, there might be something going on. Other than that, we use an acronym called alarmers. And what that is, there's just certain words that are common characteristics of individuals with FASD. So things like language, they don't understand abstract language or abstract concepts. And again, we talk in abstract ways all the time, so that can be difficult for them. They have memory problems, so remembering things, what happened. Again, this can play a part in the justice system because they don't remember. And sometimes they'll just fill in the blanks with whatever comes to their mind, and so they're seen as lying when they're actually not. It just they can't remember everything. Reasoning issues, so the cause and effect isn't there. Where they just can't link their actions to the consequences they receive, and also they can be impulsive, things like that. So we really just have to realize there's a lot of stuff going on in the brain. It affects many parts of the brain, so you're going to see it in many different areas. The biggest thing I say, though, is oftentimes they present very well, but when they just keep making the same mistake and normal techniques are not working, so if you're scratching your head and being like, what is going on with this person? Like, why do they keep doing that? Again, those can be some red flags that come up.
Right, so it's good to take into consideration those things. And I guess I'm curious, because you've worked with this population in the court system, I'm just curious what some personal stories you might be willing to share with us about being in court.
I guess a couple come to mind. So the first, oftentimes when we think of court, we think of criminal court, but I've worked with some individuals in family court, and that can be really difficult. So this is where the assessment actually was not a great thing because my one client lost her kids, and so they went to PGO status, and I was sitting there in the court. I had to talk to the judge, during the proceedings and to the lawyers, and then because of her assessment and all of that, it was deemed that she wasn't appropriate for her to mother her children. And that was probably the hardest day of my life working with this population, because I had to sit there with her while she heard that news and comfort her. So that was really difficult. And then another case too was I had met this client. He was in remand center. He had been in remand for a year and he never had a bail hearing. He was basically skipped over, but he didn't know, because again, he just didn't understand the legal issue and what was going on. So no one told him, and so he was in remand for a year without a bail hearing. So finally I got to him and we got him a lawyer and we were able to get him a bail hearing. He was able to get out of remand. But that just shows you again that they just don't understand what's happening, and so they can be lost, and no one
slide under the radar.
Right, yeah. So it was really difficult. So it was good that I went there, because he had no one to support him. So that can be, those areas can be difficult.
For sure. And I guess, so then I'm curious too, what do you do for self-care when things don't go or haven't gone as expected when you're working with this? You're familiar with all the social justice issues, but what happens when it doesn't go the way?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. I think it's really important if you have other staff members that you work with to debrief with, because sometimes the politics and the system is just not good for the person with FASD. So really making sure that you are doing self-care, talking with your colleagues, debriefing, really advocating for the people that you work with, and trying to educate other people in the justice system about it, because the more they know, then that's better for the people that we work with. As well as oftentimes we focus on the challenges of the people we work with, but really focusing on the strengths, because every person with FASD has amazing strengths. And so if we can use their strengths to overcome those challenges, it's just going to be better for everyone. So it's important.
Awesome. Thanks, Kat.
Thanks.
Thank you.